let's take a look at this Jeep where we changed the drone battery. We have, I'm not sure what it is, guys. It might be an LT1, it might be an LED6. This is actually the first time I've seen under the hood of this one. Pretty typical LT 6.2 Motec battery tray, PSC steering, S-Pod, and we do have mounts for the S-Pod and the GM controller. This Jeep has what I call character. I guess it's been wheeled quite a bit, which is what these things are for, right? We got the 42-inch tires. Looks like we got Dynatrac axles. And the LT pulls all this weight with no issue at all. It's got the double throwdown, it looks like. Let's take a look. Yep. Dynatrac, limit straps, speed bumps. It actually drives really nice. You wouldn't know that this Jeep was on 40s when you're driving it down the highway. It's very smooth, and the LT's got a lot of power. Other than being high off the ground, you'd think it was stock. This morning we're in a late model JK with an LT 6.2 and a 10-speed. I want to say it's an LED6, but I'm not really sure, and I really can't tell the difference when driving the LT1 and the LED6, the differences. This Jeep's on 42-inch tires. That's a lot of tire, guys. We're probably talking close to 1,000 pounds of wheels and tires. And with the smaller engines like the V6s, you guys know that you have to really gear them to get any kind of performance. So you might have 538s with 37s. I'm getting a lot of calls on what size gear should I put in my Jeep before I bring it to you guys. And just like everything else, the LT changes the game. Now I do have a couple of other videos on tire size and gear ratio, but let's talk about it and focus on the LTs. The LTs with the high gear transmissions have to be thought about differently than, let's say, a V6 with a 4-speed or a 5-speed. First you have the 2 high range, then you have the 4 low range. Both have to be taken into account because guys tend to over gear the low range, and I'll explain that. V8s have 2 more firing pulses for the combustion cycle, so that gives them more inherent torque than the smaller engines like the 6 and the 4 cylinders. But beyond that, the LTs have tremendous torque because of the technology, and you guys know the speech, the direct injection, the high compression, the continuous variable valve timing. So now you have all this massive torque on the bottom like a diesel. So the last thing you want to do is spin it up to get going. Yes, you have to do that in a V6, but you don't have to do that in an LT. So our recommendations, and this is going to be based on a standard JK, meaning a JK that doesn't weigh 9,000 pounds, you're not running at 12,000 feet, you're not towing a 5,000 pound trailer everywhere. If you got 32s, 33s, you can run 373s with no problem. I've even run them on 323s, the manual transmission gear JK, and they work just fine. But most guys are running 35s and up, so let's talk about that. 35s we recommend 410s, 37s we recommend 456, 40s we recommend 513. If you go to 42s and beyond, you can run the 538s. Now that's not in stone because there's a lot of variables. What altitude do you live at? If you live at 8,000 feet in Colorado, that's a lot different than sea level in Los Angeles. If you do tow a trailer, or if your JK is highly modified and you got 1,500 pounds of armor, winch, bumpers, and all that stuff, which a lot of guys have, then we can modify that. So the gear I just mentioned is the average gear, and one more component is going to be what kind of driving do you do? Do you drive your JK to the trail and do a lot of highway? Do you only stay around town and wheel? That's going to be another variable to consider. So first let's talk about your driving style. If you never go on the highway, if you're always around town and you wheel most of the time. In fact, I think the Jeep I'm in is mostly wheeled and doesn't do a lot of highway driving, but it actually drives pretty good. Then you can step it down a size. So if you got 37s, you can go to a 410 gear. Now you really don't need to because the torque of the LT when combined with the low ratios of the high gear transmissions mean you have a very diverse range of gears that you can run. So if you bring your Jeep in and you're running, let's say 37s and you have 488s in it, that's not our recommended highway slash four-wheel drive gear. It's not a problem. The LT is going to suck it up. These things are not like the V6s, the 5 speeds, the 4 speeds, where they change one gear and they rev up 1,000 RPM. The shift is very mild. You might change a couple hundred RPM. So just go ahead and run that gear. And I get a lot of guys with 40s that have 538s and they say, is that too much gear? We got plenty of these things running around on 538s and 40s. We have to talk about the transmission a second. We're going to look at the 6-speed, 8-speed, and 10-speed. The 6-speed has about a 4-to-1 low first gear, the 8-speed about a 4.6, and the 10-speed a whopping 4.7. So when you compare that to the 2.8 low ratio of the 42 RLE with a anemic 6-cylinder that can barely put out 200 horsepower, I think you can see that the LT has a massive advantage in diverse gearing. At highway speeds, we want to see you at or slightly below 2,000 RPM at 70 miles an hour. Now, with the qualifiers of you're towing a trailer, go up one gear. So let's say you got 37s, go from a 456 to a 488. But the point I was trying to make is don't re-gear to get that optimal dialed in gear for your engine, because the LT powertrain will suck it up. It doesn't care. I'm driving a Jeep right now that's heavy on 42s, and this thing feels like it's on 35s to me. You live at 6,000 feet and you regularly go up to 8,000 or 10,000 feet. Step it up a size. If your Jeep is a daily driver and you do a lot of highway driving, go ahead and step it down a gear. You can run 37s on 410s. In fact, that's the combination I had in my Jeep. It might be slightly more sluggish off the line, but you're not really going to notice it. And then you're going to be cruising down the highway at 1,700 RPM at 75 miles an hour. It's really cool to be going 80 miles an hour in one of these Jeeps at just over 2,000 RPM, where you can barely hear the engine. It's a completely different experience than the V6. So those are our recommended gears for a standard JK operating under standard conditions. Go ahead and plus or minus the size based on your driving style, the weight of your Jeep, where you live, if you tow, etc. Now, it's more confusing when we talk about low ratio, because a lot of guys think, oh, I've got to have my Rubicon case or a 4 or 5-to-1 Atlas to do what I got to do. Now, I can tell you that most of the time I keep these JKs in 4 high. Of course, I put them in 4 low to test 4 low, but they don't really need to. They got so much torque that you can probably do most of what you used to do in 4 low with a V6 in 4 high with an LT, especially with a 10-speed. So first, let's look at the low gear in these transmissions. The 6L80 is 4-to-1, as we said. The 8 and 10 speed are about 4.6 to 4.7 to 1. So what that means is if you take a Rubicon, and let's just look at the 6L80. You take a Rubicon, which has a 2.8 first gear transmission, and a 4-to-1 Rubicon transfer case, you're pushing about 11, 8, let's just round it up to almost 12-to-1 ratio. Now if you take a 10L80, and guys, I'm doing this on the fly, so the numbers aren't exact, but they're close enough. If you take a 10L80 with a 4.7 first gear, and you put it on that Rubicon transfer case, we're now talking well over 18-to-1. So the high 11s to the 18. And what that means is you're going to be revving the crap out of the motor to try to get any kind of wheel speed. You don't want to do that with an LT, because the LTs have tremendous torque and you want to take advantage of that. So sell the Rubicon case, which you could probably get well over $1,000 for, and pick yourself up either an Atlas or a 241J. The 241Js they almost give away. They're like $200 or $300 out there. And when you fit it with a 241C input gear, which we do, the heavy duty input with the larger splines, you are good to 450 to 500 horsepower. Now if you abuse it, you're going to break it with an LT. We found with the LSs they didn't really break, but with the LTs you can damage a 241, but you got to try. I also want to mention that you need to keep the transfer case cool. We've seen bills where guys full skid the vehicle and they don't wrap the exhaust, and that transfer case cooks, and heat kills transfer cases. So vent your skids, wrap your exhaust, and try not to run your exhaust pipes too close to the transfer case. So by putting the 2.7 241J transfer case in, let's say a 8 or a 10 speed, you're going to have over 12-to-1. You're actually going to have a lower ratio than a stock Rubicon. So you're not losing anything. In fact, you're gaining wheel speed and you're putting money in your pocket. Plus the 241J, in my opinion, is stronger with the 241C input than any of the Rubicons with the 41 Planetary. The other option is obviously the Atlas. We've been working with Advance for a long, long, long time. We've done hundreds of them. If you ever call over there, talk to Steve Roberts, tell him you want a Motec transfer case, because if you talk to the other guys, they're going to start questioning you. What output do you want? What vehicle speed sensor do you want? Do you want the Sight 2? What input do you want? And you guys probably don't know all that stuff. Just talk to Steve Roberts, say I got a 10 speed, and he will put together a Motec Atlas for you. The Atlas, as you know, is a gear-driven transmission. and it has counter gear, so there's a lot of moving parts in there, and it doesn't have an oil pump like the 241J. So it's even more critical to keep the Atlas cool. Do not fully enclose it while not wrapping the exhaust. Do not expose it to too much heat. Full skid your vehicle and expect the Atlas to survive on high-speed runs. You need to get cooling air over it. The benefit of the Atlas is really strong, and there's two Atlases that we use. We use the standard Atlas 2 3-to-1. So with 3-to-1 ratio, you know, we're still pushing 12 to 13-to-1 low ratio, which is lower than a stock Rubicon. You can go to a 4.3 or a 5. We've done those, but I'll tell you, with a 5-to-1 Atlas and a 10-speed, you can get out of the vehicle and just walk. It's going so slow. And you better have some boosted hydraulic brakes because it's very difficult to stop. In my opinion, unless you're a crawler, I wouldn't do that. So Advance sells us two different styles of Atlas 2s. One is the standard case and the other is, I think it's the race case, but Steve just calls it the heavy duty. And I know it's got some beefed up components inside, larger pins, hardened gears, things like that. And we run those in the higher horsepower vehicles like the LT4s and the guys that just have really large tires and they go out and whomp on them. Now, this Jeep does have a 241J in it. I'm kind of surprised he didn't step up to an Atlas. About half the guys that do these LT builds do step up to an Atlas. And maybe he plans on doing that in the future. I don't know. But I know that this transfer case is strong enough for me to go out and drive it normal. If I were to go out and beat on it, I don't think the longevity of this transfer case would be very long. The flip side of low four-wheel drive is with a 10-speed, now you have about a 0.6 overdrive. The 6, 8, and 10 speeds are all in the 0.6 range, like 0.66 down to 0.60, something like that. So the top ratios are really, really similar. And with a 0.6 high gear, that's a lot better than 0.82. So you can get more speed up. And I noticed that when set up with a 3-to-1 Atlas, you can go 35, 40 miles an hour comfortably in four-wheel drive low, which is something you really can do when you're in four-wheel drive low with a stock Jeep. Look at your tires carefully. Tires are a really big component of how your Jeep's going to drive. If you need 42s, get 42s. That'll get you that axle clearance on the pumpkin. I kind of grew up and saw the trend of going from 6-7 inch lifts on monster tires down to lower Jeeps on monster tires, and now guys are starting to back off on tire size. Tire size has a lot to do with economy, drivability, death wobble. So if you need 42-inch tires, get them. And there are reasons to have 42-inch tires. But remember, your fuel economy, your braking system, everything is going to be under more stress. And most of these larger tires require larger axles. So you're adding weight, and most of the larger axles also have more friction. So there again, you're going to lose more economy. So if you need the 42-inch tire, get it. I needed 37-inch tires on my JK because I run some trails around here, and I run the Rubicon and all that. And there's one particular trail here, I call it the Rocky Gap, that has some pretty large boulders. And without 37s, you really got to try hard not to scrape the differentials. So with 37s, it was great. But I went back to 35s because I've been so busy doing these test drives, I don't really wheel my Jeep that much anymore. So I went back to the 35s. They're lighter, they get better economy. Obviously, the drivability is a little bit better. It's not as sluggish. And just going from a 37 to a 35 can save you a couple hundred pounds of tire weight, which is going to translate into better steering and better economy. So let me wrap it up by telling you our recommended gears again. With 35s, go with 410s. 37s, go to 456. 38, 39, let's say 488. And 40s, 513. Above 40, go to a 538. Again, this is based on you having a high gear transmission and an LT, because they will just suck it up. Whatever you put in there, it's going to work around it. We recommend approximately a 3-to-1 transfer case ratio. We think 4-to-1 and up are for special purpose. A little bit about this JK. It's got a lot of stuff, roll bars, lights, giant tires. I'm sure it has big axles. I haven't looked. But we got a lot of weight in this Jeep, and I can tell you that there is no problem in this LT1. All you got to do is give it a little throttle, and it's not just making noise, it accelerates. And that's just touching the throttle, guys. So again, the LT1 doesn't care too much about the weight or drag of your vehicle. I mean, it cares, don't get me wrong. Of course, you're going to see other things affected, like fuel economy and wear. but it's still going to get the job done with ease. I also want to mention, when you get a tire, look at the tire and the specs. There's tires out there that are really sticky, meant for mud bogging and going up river trails. And then of course there's the all-terrains like the KO2, and I've got the Nittos in mine, and they're meant for highway and off-road. And we can tell when we push the Jeeps around in the shop how much drag the tires have. You got a 13.5-inch wide, sticky 37-inch tire, and the guys can barely push it. We got to use our pusher. But then you get a all-terrain 35-inch, and you push it down the shop and it just keeps rolling, and you got to stop it. So there's a big difference in drag. If you need all that extra traction in that wide tire, get it. If you don't, let's say you want a 35-inch tire. Instead of going to the 12.5, go to the 10. You might save yourself some economy, save yourself weight. If you do a lot of wheeling, of course, go to the other tire. But if you're doing mostly highway driving, there may not be a reason to run that extra wide tire. So we're gonna go up to the trail with this late model Jeep on the 42s, and we'll be back soon.